Hi, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. I'm so glad you're here today. I am sharing a new stamp from Penny Black. They have a new release. This is called Radiance, and we can take a look at it here. This wonderful spray of flowers, kind of really spring-like, but you could use them at any time. And I'm going to show you one card. We're going to go all the way through it, and then I'll show you another option. And then I'm using two new sentiment stamp sets. One is the Doubles Our Joy. This is the stamp we're going to be working with the one we're demonstrating, and then the other one is Delightful Day. I'm using a piece of hot press watercolor paper. You can use cold press if you like more texture, or even Bristol. You can see that's a little bit whiter, so you can see the difference. But I have my watercolor paper in my stamp positioner. I have the stamp already, and I'm positioning that so hopefully the bottom of the stamp will go just a slightly below the bottom of my panel, because I don't want it to be too short. I have some distress inks that I'm using. There's a list of them all in the supply list. I'm using a few Tombow pens also. These are a water-based pen. You can use any water-based pen marker you might have. I'm using a couple of three of the greens, but really two primarily, and then a black. And then I'll introduce a few others a little bit later. It's always nice to have a rainbow of those available, or you can use the Arteza or something like that. But I have these distress inks, and I'm going to start out with saltwater taffy. I'm using the mini size because it's so much easier to get into these little crevices. You could use full size, of course, but do keep a baby wipe handy. As you can see, I wipe it down here anyway. And I'm just doing the poppy-like flowers first, and I'm spritzing them. I'm using some water, but I don't want to drown it to death because I don't want it to get too blurry. I'm using then some abandoned coral, and I'm getting this down towards the bottom of the flower. Fortunately, I'm working upside down, but that's not a problem because I know where the stems are, and the stems would be the bottom of the flower, so that really helps me out. But that gives me, you can see it's the darker is starting to give me a little bit more definition. I'm using Festive Berry now. I really like saltwater taffy and Festive Berry with this. It really works out nicely. I spritzed it. Now you really see how it's starting to take shape. These flowers are the way that this stamp is designed. It gives you that shading already in it. And so you just want to be really careful about how you add your color, and it's nice to have some variation. I'm using a paintbrush with a little bit of water on it just to smooth out some of the places of the ink. And that does make it a little bit darker. It does pronounce that ink a little bit more. Now I'm taking a black Tombow pen, and I'm going to just try one of those to see if I like that center. And you can see in the stamp the center. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit off camera. I just marked all of them in the black. And you can see there, you can see it in the stamp where to put it. Be very careful at first. You don't want to do too much of it. I'm going to use a little bit of the candied apple in there as well. Now you can see I like the way the flowers are turning out, and I'm going to turn this now so maybe you can see a little bit more. But I'm using a dark green Tombow pen. So I'm using a dark green and a light green. Again, in the supply list, you'll see these things. Great to have some watercolor markers such as these. I happen to prefer the Tombow, but you can use any of them that you might have on hand. And they're great for really getting into those small areas. I do use usually the brush tip. There's a bullet tip and a brush tip, and I do use the brush usually. Great in these little skinny areas or little tight areas. There's nothing like a Tombow to really get into that color. I'm going to spritz that. I am using a stamp press here. You can, if you just want to use your heel of your hand or anything like that. Now for the broader greens, I am going to use a lighter color. And you can see, I thought I had the stamp all the way to the bottom, but I didn't. I was so concerned about, wanted the flowers to be as tall as possible. I didn't get quite to the bottom. That's all right, because I can just use the Tombow brush and a little bit of water, and I can just extend those just that tiny, tiny bit. Now I have those poppy-like flowers pretty well done. I'm going to go to these flowers up at the top, and I'm going to use some Tombow glass. Again, as I'm going to mention, these are all distress inks. I try to use minis when I can so that I can get into the smaller areas, but the large size should work just as well. I'm using also the green, dark green Tombow pen for the stems. I'm wiping off everything else except for that blue area. Just those blue kind of little forget-me-not kind of flowers. Now here I have another Tombow pen that is kind of a bluish purple, mostly blue. It's just a little bit darker than the Tombow glass, but you could use the faded jeans here, or you could use broken china, or any of those distress inks that would be a little bit darker than the Tombow glass, and that would work out too. Since it's a tiny area I'm trying to get into again, I often go to a Tombow pan because it just gets into those tiny areas. And now I'm going to go over it a little bit more with the Tombow glass, wipe down these areas. Now that's something I really had to teach myself to do, because I'm always in a hurry and I think, oh, it's no problem, I'll just stamp it, and then I get ink where it's not supposed to be. So I'm really working on not doing that. Again, a little bit darker pen and just getting those little areas. Then I'll take some of my brush again. This is a tiny brush. I'm just going to go through and sharpen up these areas just like I did with the poppies. And anytime you touch it with water, it blends out the ink a little bit more. Don't use a lot of water on it, otherwise it'll just kind of blur out. You want to have it just damp, but it will intensify the color and smooth it out. Now I'm going to dry this really, really, really well, because I'm going to move the stamp. As you may remember, on the stamp, I could have stamped the whole thing, but I wasn't going to get the flowers like I wanted them arranged. So I'm going to do my own rearranging. I have a piece of Eclipse paper here. This is just masking paper. You can also use like a full adhesive Post-it note, or you could do anything to cut this out. I'm just stamping that image, the flowers, just on that right side. I'm just stamping them with a little bit of ink. I didn't have enough ink on there because I did wipe them off. That I'm just stamping it again so I can actually see it, so that I know where I'm cutting. And I don't have to cover the whole thing because my stamp isn't going to cover the whole thing. It's just, I'm just worried about those edges. Whenever you do work like this, you want to, or anytime you're doing a card, it's heartbreaking when you work so hard and you get halfway or most of the way through, and then you get ink or you make a boo-boo somewhere. And so I'm trying not to do that. I'm cutting this out just on the edges. I don't have to go through a lot of detail. I just want to be around those flowers so that I can put it right there. And you can see I'm not covering the whole thing. And now I'm wiping off my stamp really, really, really well with a baby wipe, because we're going to go ahead and we're going to move it. So now I have to move this over so that I can fit the stamp, and I'm going to see if I actually have enough room, because I don't want to crimp the stamp on the edges, and I want it to be at an angle, so it still needs to go over a little bit further. And there, I think I have it. And I wanted it kind of tipping in towards, kind of going towards the other flowers. So I do have it at an angle, and you can really see that angle. So we're just changing. We're going to end up with all these flowers in a smaller area, which I really like that arrangement. So I have that now in position. I have my masking paper. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to do the big flower. I'm going to start out with scattered straw, and I'm really going to ink up that flower. Spritz it as well. Make sure if I get too much water on there that I'm going to just blot it off with a tissue. And now I used a little bit of wild honey. Now I decided that it wasn't quite bright enough, so I'm using a yellow, a little brighter Tombow pen. In retrospect, maybe instead of the scattered straw, I'd use a color like Buttercup that's either from Concord and Ninth or Paper Tray ink. But this worked out well too, but I did add a little bit of that yellow from the Tombow pen. Now I'm going through the same procedure, is that I'm taking just a little damp brush, and it's a small brush, and I'm just going through those areas just to brighten it up, smooth it out. Whenever you add a little bit more water to it goes into the paper a little bit more, and so it saturates that more. Then I'm going to do the stems with the same dark green, and then the broader stem with the light green Tombow pens. I'll stamp that just to get an idea. I love those kind of flowers down at the bottom that we're going to do next that are kind of more hydrangea-like. I'm going to use Seedless Preserve and Tumbled Glass. I'll start out with the Seedless Preserve, and I'm going to blot a little bit off of it because I don't want it to get too intense, but I do want it to be on there. Now I'll add the tumbled glass, spritz it. The tumbled glass is a little bit light. I still like it in there, but it's a little bit light, so I'm going to take a Tombow pen again. This is why I say it's good to just have, you don't have to have a ton of them, but a couple of colors of every color of the rainbow. So 12, 14 pens will just keep you in good stead for any of these kinds of projects. I have them listed in the supply list, but like I say, you can use any watercolor marker you want. I did scribble some right off to the edge of that blue from the Tombow pen, and I'm picking that up because then I'm just kind of dotting in some of that blue so that it has blue and purple in it. I really love that combination, especially since these feel like they're hydrangea, and you so often see those colors in the hydrangea. Now I am using the Tombow pen again in that little areas in the center where you see stems. So I'm using the dark green again. They did get colored with the purple and the blue, but I don't worry about that because you can just kind of go over it with the green, and it works out really, really well. So I just go through and touch up these areas. I still have that masking paper on, as you can see. I'm just going to touch these different areas with water just to brighten it up a little bit and see where I need to sharpen up. Again, with the green, I put a little bit of the yellow on my work surface too, and adding that to my flower. Now I'm going to peel it off because I'm done with that. And don't take it out of your positioner, your stamp positioner, until you're really, really ready to do that. But I think I'm ready now to do that and go on to the next step. So I'm just going to touch up these little areas. That's getting them right into the center of those little flowers. And now I'm going to just heat set all of this because I want it really, really, really dry. So I don't want to smear it or do anything bad. And now I'm going to take, and this is the big reason why you don't want to smear it. It's because I'm going to just smooth in a little bit of crushed olive, and I'm going to use tumbled glass. I love using the old school blending, these blending tool from Tim Holtz, but I use the dome ones. The dome ones I like a whole lot better, the dome foam. And again, they are in the supply list. And I'm just very lightly, you could see how lightly I applied that crushed olive. I'm going to do the same with the blue. I try not to go over the flowers, but the very little that I'm adding isn't going to really mess it up too much, but I do try to really avoid that. And I just try to be really judicious. You can always add ink, but it's really hard to subtract it. So I try to just add a little at a time. And I'm just adding a little bit of a background. I could have painted the background, but this way it doesn't smear as easily or bleed. And so that's something that works out really well for me. Now I'm going to do a sentiment. This comes from Double Your Joy. See, I have a piece of acetate on there over it because I have this sentiment all set up in my positioner, but I want to make sure that it's straight and that it doesn't... see that my magnet was right in the way, and if I would have just done it without that, I would maybe have had a problem. But now that it looks straight and I can change where my magnets are, I'm using Twilight. This is a Versaclear waterproof ink, and I'm just being very careful. I'm going to just lightly kiss the paper, and I think that's going to do it. And there's so many nice sentiments in that set. I have a vintage cream A2 card base. I had double stick tape on the back of this panel and just stuck that down. Now I did this one earlier. This is the full stamp, stamping it all the way across. You can see it's quite wide. It's wider than 5.5. And I did it this way. It's a bigger card. I used the Doubles of Joy for this one, but then I used Delightful Day for the larger one. But you can decide which one that you like best. Here is a close-up of the one that we just finished. And I actually like how the flowers are kind of more crowded in, and it gives you that really flower, that wildflower garden kind of feel to it. And so I really, really like this one. But I also like the one that is landscape, like this one. It's just a little bit larger card. By the way, I used Versaclear Shady Lane for the sentiment. That was the ink I used, and it came from Delightful Day stamp set. But I really like how this all turned out. And you can see him here together. I rarely do two of them, but I love these flowers so much that I'm pleased to have both of them, and will be excited to send them off. But I hope you enjoyed this project. I just had so much fun doing it, and I hope you give it a try because it's a great one to do. Now I used the Penny Black Radiance. That's the name of that stamp. I used a variety of distress inks. They're all listed in the supply list, which is a link down below. And then, of course, I used those two sentiment stamps, which are also linked down below. But I, again, want to thank you so much for being here. And if you haven't subscribed, please, we'd love it. We'd be over the moon if you would subscribe. And we hope to see you next time. Bye.